You give me a thumbs up or a chat message that says you can hear. Just want to make sure that it's clear. All right, thank you. Appreciate that from online. Well, we're a couple minutes out here. And as you know, as you've joined many Zoom meetings over the last few years yourself probably, folks will come here right about the time. So we'll keep this going. That way the audience online can hear a little bit of the audio from me, making sure that they're all good. So thanks everybody for joining online a little bit early. But we will wait here a little bit to make sure that both audiences are starting at the same time. Thank you everybody for joining. I'm just going to have to kind of fill the little space, and I won't do a stand-up comedy routine or anything. But we want to make sure we give folks online an opportunity to join too. So thank you for everybody that was helping set up extra chairs in the back as well. I really appreciate that. And while we're starting, there's also for folks, the City of Edmonds staff have been fantastic to be able to help us set up and get everything organized here. So big thanks to the City of Edmonds IT support, all the way to the admin support to setting up extra chairs. So thank you very much, everybody. All right, did I fill enough space in to be pretty close? 6:30?
6:29.
We're close to 6:29. And everybody here in the room is like, we're ready to go. Let's get through the presentation. I have questions. I totally understand that. All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started here as we get going. Well, Tanner was just reminding me that we have some other folks here from the city, City Council, and also our mayor. Now, I would not be the best person to introduce you directly myself, self-awareness on that. So if folks want to just say hello as we get started here to everybody else in the community that you're representing, I welcome you to do those introductions if you'd like to, or if you'd just like to be able to be here as a part of the meeting too, that's fine. Anyone want to say hello and for this evening?
Hi for me. Stand up, introduce yourself. Yeah, Vivian Olson, one of your council members.
Thank you.
Michelle Dodge, councilwoman.
All right. Well, thank you. And when we get to the Q&A, I'll be bringing mics around too. So we'll be able to do that. But thank you for that little bit of informal start there. Well, I'll just go ahead and kick us off. So my name is Ian Foley. I'm Senior Outreach Planner with the Department of Ecology. I want to welcome everyone here to this evening's meeting for the Unocal Edmonds site. You'll see that here behind me. The online audience will be seeing the same slides this evening. So there's some familiar faces. We've done a couple of meetings here at the end of last year, earlier this year. So this evening's presentation will have a little bit of a review because we may have some new folks that are joining this conversation and learning about this. But the majority of the presentation will be about the details of the feasibility study that we have out during our open comment period, as well as details about our public participation plan, the second of the documents out for review. We'll fill you in on some of the progress that's been made on the site to date, some of the ongoing cleanup, and then we'll also be covering the next steps here later in the presentation. I think it's got to be in. All right. So as you're bearing with some technical things, it will jump between different audiences. So we have some folks that are joining online. We also have a lot of folks here in the room. So we're going to do our best to be able to make sure both audiences are included. I think everybody online, for the benefit of this slide that they're seeing, no one here has to connect your audio. You can hear me loud and clear, right? But for folks online, they're still getting a little bit set up. But this is a good time to introduce my co-facilitator that we're going to be tag teaming to be able to facilitate both audiences. Kristen, want to say hello?
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Ferkudis.
I might be loud enough anyways. I'm Kristen Ferkudis. I'm an outreach specialist with Ecology, and as Ian said, I will be co-facilitating tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a little, the mic is the thing to get used to.
Yes.
All right, so what is during our presentation going to look like? We want to make sure that we have a respectful community meeting for everybody to be able to participate. Now, what we're going to do for this one is we're going to go ahead and go through the presentation. It'll be brief, maybe at most 30 minutes, probably even less than that, just to fill you in on some of the details to get everybody up to speed on what's been going on for the site. We're going to hold the questions and the Q&A timeframe to the end of the presentation. Now, the last time that we did this in the room, we did the questions in the room, and then we followed up with online. So we're just taking a turn. This time we're going to start with the folks online. You can chat your questions as the meeting occurs. We'll take a look at those, and then we'll answer those kind of one at a time. They will likely bring up a topic that someone in the room has a follow-up question on or wants to expound on. By all means, do that. And then we'll just work through those questions as we go. Once online queue has been completed, and we'll return back into the room and any questions that we have here, back and forth between the different audiences. So there might be some moments where we just need to pause, have another question online, or we'll do the same, pause the online audience, take some questions from the room. But be patient with us a little bit because there's some folks that in your community that you just can't see at the present room right now. I also want to mention that yellow box that's on there. So we do have an open comment period. You can submit comments during the 46 days that we have the comment period open. Actually, you could even submit those comments during the meeting too, because you can do it online. But I want to remind folks that the questions that we have here in the room, the answers that we provide, are not formal comments. If you want to be on the formal record, please submit those comments on the record, and then we'll respond to those there. So this is just a dialogue back and forth so that we can understand and learn here in this evening's meeting. All right, I don't think I have anything else in that slide. So a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be covering. That also might help a little bit for the questions that you may have. So I'll introduce the rest of our presenters here in just a second. Kristen will talk about where we are in the cleanup process and where public participation is included in that. And then this evening, Tanner will cover a large portion of the middle of the presentation for the site information. So all the details listed there, site location and background, really brief. What's been going on for the cleanup, and then also a little bit about where the remaining contamination is on the site, and then the information about the document that's out for review now. So the disproportionate cost analysis and how that influenced what the preferred alternatives are and what the selected preferred alternative is. And then we'll talk about what some additional sampling that will be occurring into the future as well for this site. And then we'll wrap up with what the next steps are, how you can submit public comments during the open comment period, and then we will open this up for Q&A after that. All right, sound like a good plan, everybody? Onward and going? Okay. Okay, so you've met Kristen and I. This will be an opportunity for Tanner to say hello and introduce yourself for the group, and also see if your mic works.
Oh.
Test for that.
I'm Tanner Bushnell. I've been the site manager for the Unocal Edmonds site for approximately 5 years.
Thank you, Tanner. So you'll see also listed on here Sam Miles for Chevron, and unfortunately Sam is feeling under the weather right now, so he's not able to join us. He is here online, so we may be able to do some of the questions for Sam online, but his counterpart is also available online for be able to answer questions too. So Chevron's here, just we'll be facilitating that aspect of online to help answer the questions. So as you can see, they can see what's happening here in the room as well in the bottom right-hand corner and hear everything as well. So when we get to that point, either one of the gentlemen from Chevron will be able to introduce themselves and help answer with the Q&A. So introductions in the room are a little bit shorter in this one. All right, at this point, I'll hand it over to Kristen as we continue on.
Thank you, Ian. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, I'm holding this at the right distance. Let's talk a little bit about MACA. I know many of you know what MACA is. It stands for the Model Toxics Control Act. It is the law in Washington State that governs how we clean up contaminated sites. It was passed in 1989 by the citizens of Washington. And this graphic that you see up there is the MACA cleanup process. And so when you take a look at this graphic, it goes from left to right. There's also a board in the back that talks about it as well. It starts with an initial investigation. So we figure out if there's a cleanup site, listed as a cleanup site, goes all through these steps to the right-hand side where we clean up the site and we finish it. This is a long process. It's very in-depth. Looks super simple here, but it's not always linear. Sometimes it bounces around. So in terms of Unocal Edmonds, where are we in this process? Click 1. There we go. So if you see the green outlines on the right-hand side of the screen, the upper yard of the Unocal Edmonds site was cleaned up in 2003, and therefore it's at the end of this process. The lower yard, however, next click, the lower yard still needs some cleaning up. Most of it has been cleaned up through a series of interim actions, and that's that green outline that you see on the left. Interim actions are early partial cleanups. It's what we do to get contamination out of the environment sooner rather than later. And so where are we now? Last click. Okay. That's okay. So if you look in the middle of this graphic with the orange outline, we are at the point where we're considering options of how to clean up the remaining contamination in the lower yard. So that is the feasibility study. And right now, the draft feasibility study is out for public comment. And so when we have a feasibility study, we do something called a disproportionate cost analysis, or a DCA. And it basically weighs the benefits and the costs of the possible options of how to clean up the site. So that DCA, I'm going to read this, determines the cleanup option that is permanent to the maximum extent practicable. That is a line from MACA. And that's how that works. We'll talk about it more later. And the last thing I want to mention on this slide are all those little orange bubbles. All those orange bubbles are where public participation occurs in the MACA process, including right now. So each step you see with a bubble is where we have public comment period and solicit input from the public. Next slide, please. Okay, so we obviously are here today because of public participation, and we've got 2 documents ready for public review and comment. Go ahead and click, please. So one is the draft feasibility study, and that includes several parts. We have the 2017 draft feasibility study that included 6 different cleanup alternatives. We have the 2024 draft feasibility study addendum, and that considers the revised cleanup levels. And then we have the site-specific terrestrial ecological evaluation. And also, we have another document that's out for public review and comment, and that's the public participation plan. And that's been updated. The original one was in an agree order from many years ago, so we updated that plan so it's its own individual document that you can review to learn how to participate in the process with Ecology. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tanner, who's going to talk about the site and much more. We have 2 stationaries. So.
All right, I'll try not to bore you all too much. I know a lot of you said before, but I'll give some basic site background. Go ahead, next slide. It's the Unocal Edmonds Fuel Terminal cleanup site. It's located near the Edmonds waterfront, and it consists of an upper yard and a lower yard. We'll talk briefly about those 2 cleanups. Unocal, or the Union Oil Company, it's a subsidiary of Chevron. So Chevron Environmental Management Company is conducting cleanup work with oversight from Ecology. Slide. Some background. From about 1920 to the 1990s, the site operated as a bulk fuel terminal where petroleum products, including gasoline, diesel, and bunker seed oil, were blended, stored, and distributed from the site. Large tankers would come up to the dock, pump fuel into the storage tanks you see up on the hillside, and then fuel would drain gravity flow down into the lower yard, where it would be distributed via truck or train. And also in the 50s, from the 50s and 70s, an asphalt plant operated on the lower yard. And then, as Kristen noted, a lot of interim actions have been conducted over the years, and these small partial cleanups have cleaned up a good portion of the yard. These cleanups mainly were done by excavating contaminated, soil contaminated with arsenic and petroleum products. And then once the soil was excavated, groundwater was exposed, and petroleum floating on top of the groundwater was cleaned up. And through those processes, the groundwater underneath the floating petroleum was cleaned up over time. And now much of the site has been cleaned up. We'll talk about the remaining areas as we go on tonight. So some details about the previous cleanups. This upper yard area was cleaned up from 2001 to 2003. As you all probably know, there's no condominiums there, so in 2003 it was approved for residential development. Areas in the lower yard were also cleaned up over that time. 2001, 2003, the orange areas, there's 3 orange areas shown on the map, those were excavated as well, removing, I think, let me look at my notes, make the numbers right. I know you probably don't totally care about the numbers, but 40,000 tons of metals and petroleum impacted soil were removed from the lower yard in those orange squares. And we were back out there in 2007, 2008, and excavated more petroleum contaminated soil. Approximately 130,000 tons of petroleum contaminated soil were removed at that time, as well as 9,000 gallons of petroleum product. And that cleanup was conducted in the blue zones. You notice the blue zone also includes a segment of Willow Creek. So Willow Creek, segment of Willow Creek was cleaned up at that time too. Next slide. Again, in 2017, a small portion of the site was excavated, as shown in the pink. And then in 2018, a dual phase extraction system was installed. Dual phase extraction system, it's kind of like a vacuum cleaner for the soil. So it sucks up soil gas and groundwater and cleans it up. And then in 2019, that system was expanded. Originally, it was just in that central yellow area. It was expanded to the small circles along Willow Creek and the stormwater retention basin. After all that cleanup work was conducted, there is still some remaining contamination at the site. And so the areas of remaining contamination, first, the red squares, small areas of shallow contamination, and those areas are concerned to ecological receptors. So we, in our field of work, often call them the bugs and bunnies. We're trying to protect the bugs and bunnies. And really, it's insects and ecological, terrestrial wildlife, and then plants. And so, in those areas, in those red areas, the contamination is shallow. It's accessible to animals and insects and plants, and became a concern. And then there was also contamination along the washout stormwater line. Many of you are aware, the washout stormwater line runs through the site. There's contamination adjacent to it, and due to its location, the stormwater line has created some difficulties in cleaning up soil in that area. So the reason this is a new map, a lot of you might. When I first saw it, it was a bit alarming to see so many red squares. So we identified those by doing an ecological evaluation of the site. And so back in 2001, when we first started excavating, the idea was that this site was going to remain industrial or return into a parking lot for a multimodal transit center. And so the cleanup levels were based on the use as a industrial or a commercial site. And so excavations were completed until those higher cleanup levels were met. And then backfilled, and then more excavations were conducted based on those cleanup levels. And then a few years ago, we looked at adjusting the cleanup levels. We adjusted them down to a lower level that would be more protective of ecological receptors, because we realized that this was not going to be a multimodal transport center, and it was likely going to be available to wildlife. And so the cleanup levels came down, And then we reassessed the data and found all these areas that had not been excavated because cleanup levels used to be higher. So it's kind of an explanation of why the map looks like it does. So we have this contamination remaining, and so Chevron, they developed a feasibility study, and they initiated the process back in 2017. And then since we've adjusted cleanup levels, they updated the feasibility study, and that's what we're here to talk about, and that's what you'll have a chance to review. So when you go to the website and you open up the document, the first thing you'll see, the first page on the document will be the 2024 feasibility study addendum. And that document is all new, and that document, it updates, gives you an update on what contamination looks like now at the site. It discusses why cleanup levels were adjusted. It updates some remedial alternatives because now we're looking at protecting ecological receptors instead of just humans and groundwater. And then they updated the disproportionate cost analysis, which is the way we select a cleanup alternative. We'll talk more about that later. And then that 2024 addendum has appendices. And the first appendix A is the 2017 feasibility study in its original form. So that's the old document. If you've read that before or looked at it, then yeah, it's all old information, so you probably don't need to look at it again. And then appendices B through D are all new information as well. Appendix B is the terrestrial ecological evaluation. And so that describes in detail how we lowered cleanup levels to protect ecological receptors. And then Appendix C is statistics on remaining contamination. Really interesting. I'm sure you'll all want to read that one. And then Appendix D is a sustainability evaluation. So it discusses the carbon footprint of the different options that we looked at, and it also talks about how those options will hold up due to climate change. Yeah, so that covers the reviewable documents. So yeah, so back to disproportionate cost analysis. So this disproportionate cost analysis is the framework that's described in MACA of how we select a cleanup alternative to move forward and implement at the site. And so what we do is we have 5 criteria, and that we look at and we rank. I guess we score each cleanup alternative based off these 5 criteria, and we rank them on a scale of 1 to 5. So the 5 criteria first is we look at overall protectiveness. So how well does the cleanup alternative protect the environment and protect us from being exposed to contaminants? Second one is permanence, and that's just how well does it permanently remove contamination. And then third is long-term effectiveness, pretty self-explanatory. 4 is management implementation risk. So are the risks associated with actually implementing the cleanup alternative? And then 5 is how hard is it to implement? So are there some technical or administrative hurdles that will make it hard to implement a cleanup alternative? And as you see on the graph, we actually weight those different criteria. This is just kind of the standard weighting that we generally use in our DCAs, but it's open to criticism, it's open to a comment. So most people generally agree with it, but if you don't like it, feel free to comment. So this is the process we use to come to a selected alternative. And this is what the results look like. This is the outcome of the DCA. So the blue bars are the benefit scores of each alternative. So these are each alternative numbered off here. As you notice, originally we had 6 alternatives. 2 and 3 dropped out because They were originally formulated in 2017, but since additional interactions have been conducted since then, they became obsolete. So now we just have 4 alternatives. And action number 5, we determined was technically not feasible, so that one dropped out as well. So 1, 4, and 6 are the ones that are still on the table. If you notice, alternative 4 has the highest benefit ranking. Alternative 4, if you've gone through any of the documents, that's the alternative where basically kind of the do everything approach. So it's the alternative where you go and you excavate out all contamination that exceeds cleanup levels. So obviously the highest benefit because you're taking out all the contamination. But the green bars behind the blue is the cost. So obviously, something of that scale is going to be very expensive as well. And so, highest benefit, but also highest cost. If you notice, alternative 6 has a fairly high benefit, but also a really low cost. So the red line going across the graph is the benefit per cost. So the way we select our preferred alternative based off of the Unocal law is that you select the one with the highest benefit per cost. So alternative 6, significantly has the highest benefit per cost. So what does alternative 6 look like? It includes excavation, which has been conducted between 2001 and 2017. It includes the implementation of a DPE system, which was installed in 2017, has been running ever since. And then we have all those areas shown that are a concern for ecological receptors, so your bugs and bunnies, and those will be managed by installing a woven geotextile, because they're fairly small areas, just kind of randomly interspersed across the site. And so the geotextile with the large aggregate cover will prevent ecological receptors from burrowing into the ground where there's contamination that could harm them. And then to keep people from going out there and digging up areas where there is some contamination remaining, we'll use an environmental covenant, and that it runs with the title of the property, and it just gives information about where contamination is and what you can and can't do in certain areas. And then part of it was, if you have an environmental covenant in place, then the site needs to be continually monitored. And so we'll continue to monitor, and if we find that this approach was not successful, then we'll have some contingency options, which are described in the feasibility study. And it's something we're still developing, and we'll be finalized in the next step. So part of a step commonly that occurs in MACA is that when we finally select a cleanup action, we need a little more information to help design the cleanup action. And so it's definitely the case with this site as well. So we've seen that map where all the red squares where there's some contamination remaining, but the data we use to develop that map is as old as from 2001. So we have 23-year-old data we're using, and we didn't think that was a good basis to create the cleanup, the details of the cleanup plan on. So so we're going to go back out. Chevron's going to go back out and resample the areas where previous contamination was observed and see if it's still there. So, your gasoline your organic gasoline components do break down over time, and so you would expect that quite a bit of contamination that was there 23 years ago is now degraded. So additional sampling will be conducted but we wanted to get input from the public, and so we're presenting the current status. We want you to comment on what you'd like to see through the sampling plan, and we'll incorporate everyone's comments before we go out and actually do the sampling. So that covers it for the current status of the site. And now Kristen's gonna discuss next steps.
Thanks, Tanner. So yeah, concluding, we just want to talk about our next steps. Right now, from September 9th through October 24th, we have an open public comment period where the public has the opportunity to review the documents that Tanner discussed and submit your comments. And then in 2024, Ecology will respond to all the public comments we receive and finalize the documents. And in 2025, we'll continue planning the cleanup based on the additional site sampling that occurs. Next slide. So how do you comment? We have an online commenting portal. That's the easiest and most direct way to submit your comment. The address is on the slide, but you can also, next click, you can also send an email or write a letter, whatever you want to Tanner, and the address and his email's there. It's also online. But however, just note that if you do that, we will actually take that information and put it on the online portal. So whatever your comment is, it is public. So we encourage you to submit your comments. And next slide is going to our Q&A ground rules. Ian, do you want to take it from here?
All right, this is probably the portion where Kristen and I get some extra steps in as we go around. But I would just want to kind of remind both audiences, some different ground rules before we jump into the Q&A. Really, the first one is just want to make sure we're respectful of everybody here, online and in person. Just have an opportunity for people to ask questions and listen, and that way we have an opportunity to respond to everybody. And we'll make sure that we have an opportunity for everybody to get your question answered. Another reminder is focusing on the objective for the meeting that we have here this evening, covering the details of the cleanup itself. We want to make sure we focus there. Any of the other questions that we may have an opportunity to get to, we want to make sure that we first cover cleanup related questions to start with. And then a couple of tips for the folks that are online. If you need a brain break for the folks in the room, just for the online folks. So we want to make sure the easiest way for you to pass that information along to us for your question is to type your question into the chat. We'll be able to use that as a tracking for the folks that are online. Anybody online, if it's easier to just verbalize your question, we do have speakers in the room that the whole room will be able to hear. For folks in the back, I've been told by the city staff it's the speakers underneath the television in the front. So if we need to repeat something, if it's not loud enough, I'll definitely do that. But for folks online, if it's easier to just convey your question that way, just let us know. Send us a chat message, raise a hand online. For folks online, and this actually is pretty similar in the room, I'll bring a mic around to everybody, but just make sure you speak clearly, make sure everybody can understand, and repeat if you need to, so we can understand what the question is. And then for folks that are online, we have an interesting experience. Folks maybe making tea or popping their own popcorn in the background for the meetings. That has happened on meetings too. But just for folks online, if you are going to have your camera on, just be aware there is a video feed in this room too. So find a quiet space, and you can tell us your recipe for popcorn if you want in the background too. But that's just a little bit of a reminder of what the online folks are going to see in the space here too. All right, so we'll jump into the Q&A.
First, could you adjust that screen so the sun's not blinding us?
Absolutely. How about anybody else? You got sun coming in at another portion? Okay, let's see. Where are we? How about we keep going down the line, Kristen? I think there's a couple more that's catching people.
There's one over here.
Keep going away from the wall.
This one? Yeah.
And could you answer, is this being recorded?
That is a great question. No, we're not recording this meeting, and that is a good reminder. I should have mentioned that at the very beginning of the meeting, so thank you. No, so for the folks in the room and online, we're not recording this, but we will have a copy of all the slides and all of the notes that we've presented so far, so you can go and take a look at that after the fact too. But yeah, thank you for that reminder, appreciate it. All right, so I don't think we have any questions in the online audience so far. Online audience, we gave you first dibs because we started with the room last time. So we'll see if we got anybody else here online that had any pressing questions to start. I don't see anything. So in-person audience, floor is yours for questions. So I've got a first one in the back. Kristen, how about you stand up front? I'll be a runner.
Okay.
And we'll both keep an eye on the chat.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Fingers crossed, we'll see if all of this works. All right, so far so good. I've heard it can get crackly, so.
I haven't reviewed the document, so forgive me if the answer is obvious. Acknowledging that between Plan 4 and Plan 6, there is a substantial cost difference, but it looked like there's just a little bit of a benefit difference. What is that little bit of benefit difference between 4 and 6?
Thank you. And I'll do a little bit of facilitating for folks to jump in on that. Tanner, you want to start? We also do have our folks of Chevron online too. So, and you can, I think any of these mics you want to grab.
It's a great question. It's something that might have to take some individual digging to go look at. I'm just off the top of my head. So, for example, one of the criteria was permanence. So, permanence is how much of the contamination is permanently removed. And so, obviously, excavation scores super high on that because they're going in and excavating everything out. So, everything's permanently removed. It's gone. And so, yeah, permanence is very high. But then, if you look at implementation risk, excavation scores fairly low on that because you're digging up contaminated soil, exposing it to workers, putting it in trucks or trains and transporting across the state. And so, so there's there's some little bit balancing out where you're running the DP system, something that primarily operates underground. It scores well at where other criteria, excavating and removing from the site scores much better at. And so, you'd have to go look at individual scores. Those are just two examples where I saw a big difference.
Not one thing.
Yeah.
And also for the audience, like if you want to have a different follow-up and I might need to move around tonight, we'll see. Just let me know if there's a follow-up that you need to go on. But I think we're going to popcorn back and forth between audiences. So Kristen did say that there was someone from online that had a question there. Do you want to go ahead and read it, Kristen?
Yeah, so the question from online is, do you have a list of the wildlife and biota that are of concern and need to be protected in the marsh area? Would that be a Jeff question?
Yeah, Jeff is on.
Okay, Jeff, I know you're online. Could you help with that question?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, section 3.2.3 of the TE does contain a list of threatened and endangered species. None are expected to occur on the lower yard, and the screening levels used in the TE are protective of all ecological receptors, not just wildlife. So it will protect soil biota, plants, and wildlife. And that's so it makes it very conservative. So it's not a matter of them protecting just some species and not others.
How's the volume on that for everybody in the back? Good? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
All right.
Follow-up.
Do we have any more online?
We do not have any more online right now.
I have a follow-up.
Okay.
From that one about the evaluation criteria that was in the pie chart there.
Okay.
I saw one in the document that I didn't see on that chart, and it was titled Consideration of Public Concerns. And so that was in the document. Where does that fit in?
Do you want to go? I can also follow up for some of that too.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in terms of the public concern aspect, the way in which DCAs are considered for all of those weights, it's included in all 5 of those categories. For folks that may have seen, I don't know if I'm going to get crackly for where I stand here.
You want this one?
We'll just see how many mics I can do at one time. So the way that the DCA would have been done in previous years, we just had a rule update. It would have been its own category in and of itself. But in the case of how the DCAs are designed now, it's included in all of them. Permanence, so what's the public concern in permanence? And practicability, implementability in other ways, what's the public concern in all of those? So it's a factor in all, is how that's weighted in.
And how do you determine that?
Okay, how do you determine that? You wanna take that aspect, Tanner? I don't know.
And one is general consensus of what we see from the public. And then if you really want it to be counted, you can submit comments saying, I don't like the scoring of this. I know that's getting like really in the weeds, but if you see a scoring that you think is just outlandish, then yeah, you can say that should be scored a 1 out of 5. You know, it's if you want to get that specific, you can. But yeah, more likely it's going to be, you know, we read, 50 comments and we say general public says that they're not concerned about the I don't know, some risk or something. So it's something that will most likely glean from the comments we get.
So really, in a nutshell, that's kind of how that comment bubble in the mock infographic kind of works out. This is the step in which you can comment on that document, the feasibility study. That's one aspect of that document. All right.
And there are some online questions, so.
All right. How about we turn to the room, and the online question will be next, unless that was a tag on to this previous question. Is it a different
It
topic?
is not a tag onto the DCA, so
Okay.
I just wanted to know
So
that.
topically, in terms of the DCA, was there any follow-ups to that topic question here? Okay. So that'll be a way to be able to continue the conversation.
We may have to go back to the pie chart slide, but I thought I heard you say that the percentages were determined based on public input. So how were those determined? From previous public comments?
So yeah, so those I mean, as you can tell, they're pretty like general divisions. 30%, 25%.
But they were weighted.
Yeah, they were weighted, and that was based off of it's kind of historically what Ecology has come to based off previous comment periods on other sites. So it's just a general starting point that Ecology has come to use based off experience from public comments on the history of sites that we've worked on.
But it says with consideration of public concern, so you've already weighed that, you've taken that into consideration, or should we be commenting on those percentages, or can we comment on those?
Yes, you can definitely comment on them. So yeah, when it says, yeah, I mean, you can definitely comment and we can adjust those.
Get comments.
Yeah.
So something also to note is we intentionally do list something as draft. So a draft feasibility study is not finalized until after the comment period. So that's part of where the comment period is involved with it.
Thank you, just trying to understand the math.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, follow-up questions for this topic? Okay, how about up front here?
The WAC for the DCA, disproportionate cost analysis, requires consideration of future land use. There's an MOU and there's a legislative budget proviso that acknowledges the future land use of excavation for recreating an estuary. And that's not considered in either the DCA or the T. So, what happens with those two documents now? Will they be revised? Will there be consideration of what's clearly a proposed future use?
Question. How do you want to start?
So the whole reason that I shouldn't say the whole reason, but yeah, the TE was started because we were informed of the likely future use of the site. So so it definitely has been incorporated and considered. I mean, is there a specific element that?
They both assume, neither one assumes excavation. Both of them assume capping. Both documents assume capping. Neither acknowledges that there could be excavation of the site, which would pretty significantly change the outcome of the DCA and the T.
So the TE just determines
Service.
yeah, so areas where animals will likely reside essentially. And so the TE identified cleanup levels that would, contaminant levels that would be protective of ecological receptors, as well as how, the range in which that would apply. So that would apply to both, that would apply to any cleanup alternative.
But only the surface, not the space.
So if you, if there's an excavation, then the, your surface would have to adjust accordingly. So if you, you still need essentially, 4 feet of clean, so that, for example, the ecological zone for the site was determined to be 4 feet, 4 feet depth of soil. And so, if you change the topography of the site, then that zone would have to adjust accordingly. If you lower the surface elevation, 2 feet, then you're gonna have to go 2 feet lower, look 2 feet lower to see if there's soil contamination there that needs to be addressed.
Why isn't that considered in the document?
That the topography could change?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a responsibility of the, whoever undertakes that cleanup, or undertakes that restoration process.
Let me ask a question for your follow-up to see if I'm following. So Tanner's referring to excavation with regards to the contamination cleanup. Are you referring to that and also additional further depth excavation for land use?
Right, if it's restored to an estuary, whoever wants to restore to an estuary will have to pay to remove all of the.
Can you speak up?
remaining-
Can you give him a mic?
So,
Sorry, go ahead.
if the site is returned to an estuary with excavation, as acknowledged by the legislature and the city, whoever does that in the future will have to pay for cleaning up Chevron's pollution. That's not addressed in the cost analysis or in the T. And in spite of the fact that the WAC governing these documents says you must consider future land use, and it's not mentioned.
That helped clarify a little bit of what that was referring to, Tanner?
Yeah.
Follow up with that.
So certainly submit a comment on this, because that's something that there's more recent language in the rule that discusses considering, it specifically says restoration. And so that's something that would definitely be worth commenting on. But the first thing it says is that, the TEE was implemented because we knew that there was a potential for the site to be restored. And so, we've already adjusted the cleanup levels based off of likely future use. But we cannot direct, even though there certainly is, it'd be great to restore the site, we can't direct Chevron to clean up their site for someone else's future use of the property. Ecology can't direct private landowners what they do with the property, or what someone in the future might do with their property. That's not within our legal ability to push on private land.
All right, I know we have some more questions online, but we had one gentleman here that had a question that was about the DCA as well.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll keep going with the DCA topic.
And looking at your criteria there, 2 is permanence and 3 is long-term effectiveness. On their face, those are the same thing. How do you distinguish between those 2 factors in a way that the language wouldn't suggest you are?
That's a great question. They do look very, very similar. So permanence is how permanent the removal of contamination from the site. So, for example, a excavation, excavation is very permanent. You take the contamination, you move off the site, there's no more contamination there, super permanent. Also very effective in the long term because it's gone. But if you put a permanent cap on top of the contamination is still there, so it hasn't been removed, so the permanence is score fairly low. But long-term effectiveness, if it's managed appropriately, would score fairly well, because in the long term it is effective, but it didn't actually remove the contamination permanently, but it is effective.
All right, other questions online, Kristen, that are related to DCA or different?
No, we don't have any other questions related to the DCA. We have quite a few questions related to the preferred alternative and the alternatives.
Okay, any more follow-ups for the DCA type questions? All right, we'll go here, and I saw someone else on the right.
I'm looking at the cost factors, and you said that there was you considered the cost, and on one of them you said, and we considered the excavation that has been done. So when you gave those numbers of 8 to $11 million on excavation and 750,000 on alternative 6, were you including the cost of the excavation that had been done in the years past, or were you considering the cost of what it would be now to carry forward that alternative?
Right, where's the timeline for that calculation on cost, Tanner?
So yeah, another great comment that if you don't like my response, please submit it in writing, because yeah, it could make a difference. So the timeline is now. So starting from now, moving forward, the cleanup that needs to be conducted from now moving forward is what the costs are based off of. And you could argue that the DCA should include all costs for the entire cleanup. Yeah, and if that's something that to your eye looks like it would make a difference, then yeah, make that comment and we can reassess based off of. We'll take a close look at the law and see if it would if there is grounds for us requiring them to include all costs, including previous interactions.
All right. Now I had a follow-up in the front here, I think, first, and I also see some other hands.
Actually, mine's just a really simple question. So this DCA is done with the assumption that the pipe stays in place in all those hot spots.
So the DCA was conducted for every alternative. So one of the alternative 4 was removing all the hot spots, removing all the contamination on the pipe, including under the pipe, which would require some removal of pipe sections. So alternative 4 includes removal of all contamination. So a DCA was conducted for alternative 4. And then a separate one was conducted for alternative 1 and alternative 6 and 5 here. And then they're compared against one another. So DCA was conducted for every single alternative, including the full removal.
Because obviously, removal is going to cost, if you think about it.
In fact, Meadowdale Beach RCO rejected them to start with, so they had to do a cost-benefit analysis to get the whole thing done. Obviously it's going to cost more to remove soils and to bring it to a state of natural habitat. So, to me, there's no environmental benefit of what's happening to the environment that's really part of that DCA. So in other words, the wonders of having a future urban oasis of a natural habitat with no pipe or no hotspots, that analysis, that benefit, cost benefit, hasn't been, in my opinion, added to your DCA. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that is a limitation of the DCA. DCA solely focuses on cleanup and exposures to environmental receptors from existing contamination. So yeah, it does not take into account environmental benefit of future benefit of the cleanup. So.
All right, so hang on, online audience. We still know you're there. We still know there's other questions there. But we had a couple other follow-ups in the space in the room here about the DCA. So different subject for the hands that went up? Still question, the DCA? Okay.
I think this is a question for DCA. So everything we're talking about assumes some target, some land use. Tanner, you mentioned in response to this gentleman's question that you can't design things around every future possible land use. But what land use do you have in mind that we're targeting in all this? You must have something that we're shooting for. What's the generic target land use?
Sorry about the crackle, folks. It just is something the city said we could happen with this.
So the cleanup levels that were set for the site were based on unrestricted land use. So the cleanup levels are basically as stringent as you can get. So there's no the only limitation based on the cleanup level site is you couldn't put a drinking water well on the site. So everything else is fair ground. You couldn't put a drinking water on the site anyway because the water's brackish, it's right next to Puget Sound. So the cleanup levels are set based off unrestricted land use, which would include a marsh restoration. But as far as the implementation of the cleanup action, yeah, that takes into account. It doesn't. It's not on Ecology or the current landowner to project out what the next landowner is going to use the property for. So that's not. Going back to the same answer as the previous question here from Bill. Yeah, we can't project out and say, Chevron, the next owner is going to do this. You have to clean up for what the next owner wants to do. We can set cleanup levels that would make it protective of future uses. But if they're going to change the site around, then we can't require Chevron to do something for the next owner. I mean, we live in a capitalist society. I know it's unfortunate, but when the property is going to be sold as a property with some, hot spots in it, and the price of the property should reflect that.
Okay, so we'll still stick with the topic of the DCA. Make sure that we've cleared that topic before we go to the online. So if there's some other questions with other topics, we'll definitely get there. But do we have follow-ups for this?
So in response to your last answer, my understanding is that land was originally estuary marsh, and the oil company who built the oil facility on that land had to have filled it in order to put in what is now the lower yard. So that was an oil company choice to fill in the land. And now this future public use of the land asks us to make it possible to excavate in order to bring back the original estuary that the oil company covered. So you're speaking of capitalism and you can anticipate a future use. We have anticipated a future use and it involves full restoration. So I'm a little confused by the implication that Exxon couldn't perform this because they are, or their original oil company, were the ones who originally covered the land, creating a cover that we want to remove.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great comment that should go in. But that is way outside my wheelhouse. So, I think you should submit that comment, but that's certainly not something I can answer today.
So I want to point out something that is a common for some of the responses that we've had, is we have an open comment period. So the last time that we were here for a meeting like this for information, and the follow-up that we had online, those were community information meetings, Q&A sort of meetings, but we did not have the outlet of a comment period during those last engagements and events that we had. This time we do. This is also something that's collecting on the record, the formal record, for a formal response. So we're not trying to sound like a broken record in some of our response to this, but it's a reminder of how the public process works. So that goes on the record, that's on there for the site going forward, and we respond to that. So we're trying to be respectful in that response. I'm just trying to put context with it, but we're trying not to be disrespectful in repeating it. So, a lot of different things that have been shared when we respond that way. We anticipate there's going to be some comments that are going to come in for this site, so we know that. All right, so more follow-ups for this topic? Okay. Kristen, how about at this point, go ahead and read one of the questions that we have online, and then I'll return back to the room. So we'll go back and forth.
Okay, many of the questions online have to do with the alternatives, which is why I've moved to that slide. The first question is, does alternative 6 shift the contamination burden from Chevron to future landowners and to future generations?
Yes.
Why I asked that question.
So it is, so the focus of the cleanup is to make it protective of environmental receptors. And so if someone is going to go and change the current condition of the site, then yes, it's going to shift. It's going to shift the responsibility of that work onto the person who's conducting the work. If the site stays as is, then alternative 6 is protective of human health and the environment. But it is not a restoration process. It's a cleanup and protection process.
We do have some more online questions related to that. We might want to just follow up with those first. So does number 6 support turning the marsh estuary into a fully functioning tidal marsh from creeks to sound?
Yeah, it doesn't create roadblocks, as in there are no restrictions on being able to do the work. Obviously, it's going to be more costly, and there's going to be some steps that will be taken to address the contamination as it's removed. But it is still a possibility to restore the marsh. But it's not. Yeah, it's not as favorable as alternative form.
Okay, we have another question in that same vein. What happens in the future if Plan 6 is used and the community decides to open the marsh to the sound and expand to Marina Beach and the dog park and/or have an emergency access to the marina under the railroad? Do you understand?
There's a lot there, but I'll focus on the beginning of it at least. So it's the city will be purchasing a property with hotspots of contamination in it, and depending on what type of restoration goes into place, those at least some of those areas will need to be addressed, and there'll be again. This is all just to read. This is the feasibility study stage. This is not the cleanup action plan stage, and so we are in the process of selecting the cleanup action. So my comments are all directed at the recommended alternative or the proposed alternative. This is not the selected alternative. So I will talk about it like it's the selected one. But we are doing the feasibility study. We'll respond to comments, make any adjustments as necessary, and then do the cleanup action plan. We'll have another meeting here. So there is room for changes. Just make that clear. That's kind of our having comment period. Okay, so. But if alternative 6 is the selected alternative, then yeah, the city will be purchasing a contaminated property. at least partially contaminated, and there'll be an environmental covenant through Alternative 6, and so the environmental covenant would require the city to work with Ecology to make sure that if they do dig in areas that have contamination, that they do it in a way that continues to protect the environment, protect the workers that are there. So there'll be some additional steps that the city will have to address if Alternative 6 is implemented and they decide to purchase the property and restore the site.
Okay, so now we have started into another topic as well. So we've had an opportunity for the online audience follow-ups for some of what was just brought up there for the room. I know you had your hand up first, but was it for the gentleman in the blue
Well,
here?
I think it's follow-up.
Okay, well, I was actually behind you, sir, sorry, for the gentleman behind.
a follow-up on that one.
Was it that? And then I know in green over here to the side, you had your hand up next.
One of my big concerns is the washed-off pipe. It's the green line on the drawing there. The size and condition of that pipe, whether or not, I assume it's below the cap, so it's going to be in the contaminated material. I've seen a lot of old pipes exfiltrate many CFS of water out of the area and be a source of contamination to the beach directly. What's the status of that pipe? Was that cost included in there? And I think probably the alternative to dig it up and replace it, or at least daylight that pipe, so that water is not flowing beneath the cap where it's going to mobilize contaminants. And so that should be included in the evaluation of the cost.
So that was included in Alternative 4, was removing some sections of the pipe. The pipe has been inspected, I don't remember the year, but has been inspected, and the condition of the pipe was fair.
Was it pressure tested?
It was actually,
Just videoed?
I do not think it was pressure tested based on
Okay,
the size.
see, that's the whole point. If it's not pressure tested, you could have many thousands of gallons of water flowing into that pipe and then going out from beneath the cap.
Yeah, so there's several particularly in the area of contamination, there's several groundwater monitoring wells directly adjacent to the stormwater pipe. And those wells have shown up clean for approximately the past 8 years. And so if those, past 5 years. And so if those continue to show clean, that shows that there's the groundwater in that zone is clean. So groundwater that's being transported from the soil into the pipe meets the cleanup levels. And so as long as those groundwater wells continue to be clean, then there should not be a concern for groundwater entering the pipe.
Is that a concrete pipe?
That's it. I believe it's corrugated.
Asbestos lined CMP.
We need HDPE?
CMP. Asbestos lined CMP.
Okay, that's really old, unreinforced. It's probably ready to
No, not
collapse.
asbestos, I'm sorry. Asphalt.
Oh,
Asphalt, big difference.
There is an
It's a
asbestos
corrugated
pipe.
steel, right?
Either
You
way,
might mention it has a
it's
manhole, so
unreinforced.
when you have excess pressure, it spills out the manhole into the marsh. That big manhole on the Unocal side of the railroad tracks. When you have heavy rain, water shoots out of that.
Okay.
So it's handles its pressure by having that escape out into the marsh.
Okay.
So there's a couple different questions that have been here in the room too, but I also do want to mention that some of these different sentiments of community experience that you have seen and observed something, great comments for the comment period as well, because that's the sort of thing, community-based knowledge, put that on the record as well. So I know we had one here in the back, very patient, and then we'll go over here to the gentleman in green.
And this is a follow-up to that. I think that's a really key issue that was just raised. You'll get a lot of comments from the city on other topics, I think, before the deadline, but I wanted to be here tonight to talk about this one specifically, because none of the options include any work on that stormwater line. It's at least 52 years old. It's corrugated metal pipe lined with asphalt, which provides no real structural support. We've got a pipe exactly made of the same thing, the exact same size, I believe, but this pipe goes right by, and that has rotted out to the point where the entire bottom of the pipe is gone. It's even curling up on the inside of it. We lost a video camera in it once, trying to look at the condition of the pipe. I know you said that the state has looked at it, or at least somebody, maybe a contractor, has looked at it. That was 11 years ago, at least. That happened. It's 13 years ago. It's 2011, I believe your document says. And it's at least 52 years old now. And I look at if you adjust it for inflation, literally many tens of millions of dollars that have been spent getting to this point in the cleanup. And I think we all appreciate those efforts. But to leave this old piece of infrastructure there without addressing it, I think is really short-sighted. And when you talk about that category of permanence, it just should blow that out of the water. That pipe will fail someday if it isn't addressed. And it's going to fail in the biggest storm, and all of our storms are getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the years go by. That pipe is already overpressurized in a decent rainstorm. It pops the manhole on one end and on the other end as it goes across the marsh. So it's surcharged. And we got a lot more pressure on that, and as storms increase, there's going to be more flow through that more often, and it's going to fail. And if you think you're doing a 100-year project here to permanently allow us to restore the marsh and be happy about the results of that, you're just building in a time bomb there to not address that. My personal suggestion would be to come up with a cost, maybe you did already, I just haven't seen it, to line the pipe, because putting in a liner would provide the structural support that is eventually going to give out there. It would also provide or make it far less likely to leak water out or let water in as the tide goes up and down and the marsh levels go up and down. And it can't be that expensive after many tens of millions of dollars. Just strongly would encourage you to put in the feasibility study recommendation going into the cleanup action plan process that in both alternatives, any alternatives you do on the marsh should include that. Right now, I think your report says this. You recognize that it could be a source of contamination on the infiltration side when levels are such that that's the way the water's going, and coming into the pipe, going out to Puget Sound. And you say that you're going to monitor those contaminants of concern, and when they rise above the cleanup level, then you would reconsider looking at the pipe. Well, that's after you get all done, everybody walks away, and the liability may shift to the city. That's just not a good outcome. It seems logical to me, and I bet to a lot of people, that you need to take care of that. And the liner would not be that expensive. Should be included. That's what we feel. I'm with the city, by the way. I didn't mention that. I'm Phil Williams, Public Works and Utilities Director, and I want to thank everybody for coming. I think this has been a really informative process. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Tanner and Kristen. Well done, but you'll be getting some strong input, I think, on this topic before the end of the comment period. Thank you.
So up next was on the other side of the room. All right. Thank you.
Why are you leaving when I'm starting talking? Okay, to be clear, alternative 6 leaves 22 different areas of contamination. It's called a cleanup method, but it's not really a cleanup method, it's a cover-up. Right? Literally, it's a cover-up. I don't really have a question for ecology, but a question for the audience here. How many people would like to see this site all the way cleaned up and not just covered up? Raise your hand.
All of us.
Okay. Now, you raise your hands. That doesn't really count. You have to put your comments online. Tanner's made that very clear here. Put your comments online. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so the invisible audience to this audience, you can't see each other. So I know that there's a couple other questions that have been online. Are any of the questions online follow-ups to the topics that we've been covering here? Or
There are some questions related to the alternatives.
Okay, so let's pause here for the in-person. We'll return to the questions that are about this topic as well for those online, and then I'll follow back up in the room after that. So So Kristen, go ahead and read those away.
Okay. Let's see, I've just been skipping around a little bit here. So why would number 4, evacuating all of the contamination or excavating, yeah, thank you. Excavating all of the contamination not work?
So yeah, it would work great. It has the highest benefit score, so it is the most, of all the proposed methods, that would be the most permanent solution. So it is it's highest scoring, so it would work.
Okay, next one. What happens in the future if plan number 6 is used? Okay, we already did that one. If there's a plan to actually clean up the site to restore it to pre-tank farm quality, 100%, or are all of the plans only partial cleanups?
Alternative 4 is very close. I mean, it's not. I mean, none of the plants are marsh restorations, so nothing's going to remove the lower yard fill material. But plan number 4 removes all the contamination.
And the last one was, does number 6, actually this is not the last one, but does number 6 support turning the marsh estuary into a fully functioning tidal marsh from creek to sound? You did, but I'm repeating it just for acknowledgement. There's a lot of repetitive questions, so. Yeah, I think that was clear, but just making sure that they're read. Just give me a moment here. A few more things are coming in. Okay, so these are comments, so we'll take those comments. And there's something about cleanup levels. Just give me a second. I'm scrolling up and down. Everyone, just be patient with me for a moment because there's a fair amount of questions. Okay, when considering target cleanup levels, how do you determine how clean is clean for such a unique habitat feature, such as the Edmonds Marsh estuary? I know you probably spoke to this, but again, acknowledging the question.
Yeah, some of you may have heard this before, but so we consider basically all receptors we can think of. So we consider humans contacting it, humans drinking it. Well, not in this case, humans not drinking it because we already determined can't put a groundwater well. We consider exposure to fish, humans eating fish. We consider plants living in the soil, insects or rodents burning in the soil. So we consider all of the different exposure routes to humans, the environment, animals, and then we select the lowest ones. And so that's how we came up with cleanup levels that would be protective of unrestricted land use. So we'll be able to use it however you want.
Can you clarify fish? What fish did you use in your analysis?
So that's again way outside my wheelhouse. So we use default water quality numbers. So, and I would have to look that up to see what fish are used to develop the water quality numbers.
Someone commented earlier from Chevron said there were no T&E species, but if this is done right, we would have Chinook salmon as a threatened species. Were they taken into account as an ecological receptor?
Again, it would take looking at how water quality developed their protection numbers, but it's their surface water quality numbers. And yeah, I'd have to see what organisms were considered in developing that number. But it's a statewide number used for the water.
And for that sort of question, that's also something you can submit for a comment too. So our record that we keep mentioning in terms of things being on the record for a comment, it can also be a question for follow-up as well. So to make sure that we have an opportunity for that. Before, when we had done some of the previous events, we had reached out to ask for questions, and we followed up with those questions either in the meeting or we followed up with them via email afterwards. In the public comment period, it's a similar follow-up mechanism, except that it goes in through the public comment period, collecting all comments. So questions on different species of fish types is a great question to ask as a comment too. Because we'll have more opportunity to be able to go back, look at the reports, look at the data, and answer that on the record. All right, so I see some questions in the room. Are we ready for that, or one more
We have
online?
one more online.
Okay, one more online,
yeah.
and then I think gentleman in black here, you had your first hand up.
Okay. Yep. On plan number 4, what percent is actually cleaned up? What percent? That's the question. So I'm assuming they were asking about the percent of contamination.
I'm asking, if you go back to 2001, I mean, I'm totally guessing here based off of looking at various maps, but I mean, I would guess in like above 95% of the contamination has been cleaned up. 'Cause we're looking at very, very small lenses and very small areas of contamination remaining.
That's it for online.
Okay, I will go. And also I realize as I am putting out folks in the room, I need to be a little bit more inclusive in terms of how I'm doing that. So I've stepped on my own feet, and in any way I apologize. Just as a heads up to folks.
You stated that Chevron will have to go in and reevaluate these 20-year-old hotspots. Am I correct on that? To part of.
Yes.
So who validates what they come up with? Is there any science people independent people that look at what Chevron comes up with as far as these are not contaminated anymore?
What's your role as a site manager?
Right.
So Chevron will submit a sampling plan to Ecology to review, and that will include a quality analysis plan and a sampling analysis plan as well.
So do they use in-house scientists, or do they farm it out to an independent research group, or how is it?
So Chevron themselves
Who keeps Chevron honest?
Ecology. So Chevron will hire the consultant. The consultant will prepare a plan, submit it to Ecology. We'll review it, and we'll say you need to add this or it's good to go type of thing. And just another punch or plug for submitting comments is you can comment on what you want to see in that sample analysis plan as well. So we'll take into consideration comments from the public as well as Ecology's internal expertise. Using a variety of scientists here in Ecology and review that plan and allocate it. And then often, I'm not sure if it'll occur on this particular part of the project, but a lot of the monitoring that goes on to the site, WashDOT has their consultant also attend and oversee, just because can be the next landowner.
Thank you.
So one bit of context to something Tanner had mentioned, and also to your sampling question. Chevron also acknowledged, we're starting this comment period, that they wanted to be able to do additional sampling to better inform the work that we are regulating and requiring for the next step for them to complete, which we agreed with. But we also wanted to be able to have the documents out there as what exists right now for everyone to be able to see the latest progress, and then submit your comments for additional sampling if there's anything beyond as well. So we only need to compile everything at one time to do one sampling for the next step, all at one time, versus inform, start, stop, and integrate this. Just do it all at one time. So that's the reason for some context there. All right. I think my first question was in the back, and I'll work my way forward a little bit.
Hi. A mechanical question. You're talking about putting an environmental covenant over the entire site? Every single inch of the site?
So yeah, covenants run with property, so it would be, the entire property.
And we've asked about what that might say. I assume it'd be, don't dig. How far down do you think you'd say that you don't dig? I mean, we would like to have some idea of what the environmental covenant might say.
Okay, so.
And a follow-up on that, on the hot spots, how, are you going to stake them out like where you have the liners, are you gonna mark the ground so you know where they are? Or how, I'm a layperson, so I don't know how you do these things, but how would I know if I was planning on digging the channel where those hot spots are?
So yeah, second part is a great question. So just to address the first part, so all the areas in red are shallow contamination within 4 feet of the ground surface, and so the restrictions would be where that contamination is found. So I mean, some of those I think are as shallow as 2 feet. So yeah, you'd have restrictions going as far as 2 feet deep in those particular areas. But there is, I mean, the restriction is that you don't dig there unless you work with Ecology. And so there is an opportunity to dig there. It's just that when you do dig there, you're most likely going to run into contamination. And so you have to do some steps, prepare plans that are submitted to Ecology that shows what you're going to do with that contamination, how are you going to manage it when it's uncovered. And so it's still a possibility to, I mean, just like, exactly like if Chevron went out there and wanted to dig it up all right now, they'd have to submit a plan to us. Maybe the same thing for the next property owner. I'm sorry, I'm trying to come back to the second half of your question. Quick reminder.
The first part was the
Oh, yeah. So market, yeah, and that's, I mean, the plan is to put geotextile in aggregate cover. If you course aggregate, it should be a fairly identifiable area. But with that many spots, we're hoping that with the additional sampling that gets whittled down a lot. But yeah, in some cases, people put up fences around them. They can be like decorative fences, like split rail fence type thing, something just to mark them. In this case, that doesn't sound terribly feasible, but that type of thing has been used at other sites. So
What you said is that you would mark it in some identifiable way.
Yeah, and then it'll also be surveyed in as well. So in that survey, would go in the environment code.
All right, so just for the online audience, we do see that you have some more comments here. There've been a couple of hands in the audience that you may not be able to see being online that have been related to this topic. So I think we're still on topic to some of the similar questions. Feasibility studies, that sort of aspect. Well, I think here you had your next question.
I think this relates to the feasibility study, but I might have missed this in the beginning, but could you remind us the timeline after the 45-day comment period for taking in all of this good input and coming back with the next steps and what those look like?
Oh, I'm happy to take that in terms of the next steps. So the comment period ends on October 24th, so you have until 11:59 p.m. to submit your comments. So like we said, we definitely encourage you to do so. In 2024, we'll respond to all of the comments received. So that might take a little time. You'll have to be patient with us depending on how many comments we do get. After that, we'll also finalize the documents. So the goal is to finalize all of them by the end of 2024. And then 2025, we'll move forward with the next steps. Did that answer your question? Okay.
All right, I'll move back from the back to the front.
This comment is on, I guess, alternative 6 and also on the dual phase extraction system, DPE system. First of all, the handout, if you can show that slide, Kristen, of the DPE system.
Give me a moment. Getting there. Wait.
Other way, probably.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, it was in the preferred alternative slide.
Well, that system, yeah, there you go.
Sorry about that.
Is that the same system that's on site? Or is that just a drawing that you got to place on there because it's a nice cartoon?
Yeah, it's that's just a cartoon that depicts the type of system that is installed.
Okay, the DP construction details from Mercatus is designed differently.
Yeah, I guess what aspects are?
On this aspect, you have the casing going down to the screen, and it stops about the little where the LNAPA would be, and then below that, in this one, you can maybe hand it to him, the pump is installed in the sump, and it's pumping so it can dewater that area. Which system has been operating, and how effective has that been? Have you run or done some type of analysis? Obviously, you're going to try to run that system again. Are you going to try to optimize it? How effective will it be to get rid of the contamination in that area in the wells?
Yeah, so this drop tube, that's not, it doesn't go just to groundwater, it goes well below. So it's pulling groundwater from panels.
So that's cartoon is irrelevant.
I mean, everything but the depth of the drop tube is accurate. So the drop tube just goes deeper down, so when it's sucking up, it pulls groundwater down to a deeper depth. It exposes soil that used to be covered by water to air. And then in addition to pumping water, it also is pumping soil gas out of the formation. And so contamination that is attached to soil gas that doesn't transport very well in groundwater can be pulled off through the vapor phase. So that showing the air being sucked in, everything's accurate about that except for the groundwater level and the level of the drop tube.
Those two are the same. I don't think so.
No, I mean, if that tube went down deeper, if the gray tube in there went deeper, then it would be the same thing as that.
Well, how are you going to optimize that system to? I guess that'll be kind of in the weeds. That might be in.
That's a good question. So the system was first installed directly around the stormwater drain, and it was within 1 year it cleaned up groundwater to below cleanup levels. So in 1 year it was very effective at cleaning up groundwater, and we haven't seen contamination return in that area since. So in the past 5 years we haven't seen groundwater in that initially installed area, but we went back in and sampled soil, and after we saw groundwater come down, we're like, that's great news. We went back in and sampled soil, and soil was still above cleanup levels. And it was high enough above where we don't expect that even running the system an additional 4 years since then that the soil levels have been brought down to below cleanup levels. And so the DP system was very effective at treating groundwater. It was very mildly effective at treating soil. But it treats soil enough where it's not leaching out into groundwater. So as far as optimizing,
how do we know that? How do we know it's treating whatever remains behind in the soil formation that's not desorbing at levels that are high enough?
So we've had periods of shutdown of the system in its entirety, and we're sampling every 3 months. And so in the past, 16 groundwater monitoring rounds, we haven't seen.
And I looked at the extraction system and how long it's operated, and it's been down over 50% of the time.
About 50%. Yeah. Well, the system in its entirety is not operated more than 50%. The groundwater pumping itself is operated, I don't know the percent, but well over 50%. But the vapor phase was down for a long time during COVID.
Okay. With the soil sampling that you're going to be doing, I guess I was going to go to the whole aspect of sampling. And I'm not too sure how you'll be doing that soil sampling, but I was wondering if you looked at ways to do some in situ soil sampling by putting down like an interface probe that you can actually look at what the concentrations are for the various constituents there. So you can kind of do some fill screening within a certain area. And then when you actually take your soil sample, you know that you're going to have either some there or not there.
Taking it and doing an in situ soil sample?
No, taking it, you can use an in situ system where you can go ahead and take it down there, and you basically have some type of membrane in there, and you heat that up, and it heats up the soil. And then as that goes up to a column, then you can put on GC, you can find out whether you have any of the contaminants there.
It'll be a membrane interface probe.
That might be a good way to do some field screening before you actually take that and be able to determine what areas you may want to say you have success or need to go back again.
Okay, I mean, you can definitely submit as a comment.
Okay.
We're accepting ideas on soil sampling as well. So, yeah, I mean, if you think it's better than the screening we've already done through past investigations, then yeah, go ahead and submit it.
So to also add some context for what we were talking about holding in hand and showing for all audience, it was figure 3.2 of an engineering design report that you were referencing, in difference from what is up on the screen for everybody to see here right now. So just what I had in my hand that you couldn't see either for the online audience too. Okay, so I know we had some more here in the audience. Similar questions in terms of topical, because I believe we had a similar question in the room here up next, right?
Let's
Or was
stay
it a
with
different
that
topic?
then, and then we'll.
Regarding what's on the screen.
So was this similar to, sorry, you're asking a clarifying question? So cleanup alternatives was the topic in general. So this is one aspect of the cleanup alternative. Anything else for the cleanup alternatives?
My question is actually for Chevron. You said that there are you said that there are one or two people online. Are we able to ask Chevron questions? I mean, so I guess my question to Chevron is, you obviously thought about the cost benefit analysis too, that got you to alternative 6. And I think you're hearing tonight that our community here is really looking for a restored marsh estuary. And when we think of the benefit, we're thinking of habitat for salmon. And I think everybody in the United States is well aware that our salmon are endangered. We're thinking of our orca population. Our southern resident orcas are diminishing. We don't know whether they're viable enough to survive. So when we think of benefit, we're looking way, way ahead. And so when I looked through the document and I looked at the difference in the cost between number 6 and number 10, and I looked at it a little bit from a corporate perspective. Yeah, you're responsible to your stockholders and your investors and your employees, I guess. But I look at it as being responsible and really looking ahead to what you could do for the future, not just of our community, but future generations that could eat salmon, that could go out on whale watching boats and see orcas. And I guess what I want to know if now, after hearing from people here, this would at all move you or inspire you to maybe reconsider the cost benefit?
Good.
So I do know we have a couple folks online from Chevron. Any response to the last comment from the room here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Ian, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry, I turned my mic off. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, so my name is James Kiernan with Chevron. I am relatively new to this project. You may remember my predecessor, Kim, who had it for the previous 20 years. So I don't have all the institutional knowledge, unfortunately, when she just retired. And I appreciate that feedback. I think, again, we want to go out and do some more sampling. A lot of the samples that these are based on are 20 plus years old. And, we've done a lot of cleanup since then, right? And in the same respect, things just degrade naturally. And so I think the hope is that a lot of these areas that are identified on that figure go away, and they're shown to be, clean and good. And if that happens, this isn't the final cleanup action plan, right? And so we'll take all the feedback into consideration. Around the pipe is and would be a major endeavor. I mean, you heard comments earlier, it's very fragile from what I understand, and I think, the last assessment of it was 2011. And, I think it has a lot to do with preventing flooding in the area from what I understand. So it's not something to be taken lightly, but it is a washed-out line. I don't know their ultimate plans for it. But like I said, hopefully after this sampling, we'll have some more information. And hopefully things will be a little clearer when we get to the cleanup action plan phase. But we do take future use into consideration. All along, when we were doing the original cleanups, obviously the planned use of the site as we knew it was for the ferry terminal. And so that's why these little areas remain, because the cleanup levels were different back then. And now that, in the last couple of years, kind of that proposed use has changed, although I don't recall seeing if there's concrete plans yet, or it's just, hypothetical at this point. But, that resulted in much lower cleanup levels, which were protective of, all the animals in the soil, and that would be in the marsh environment, which is where we're at today. So, like I said, hopefully after we do the additional sampling, we'll have more information to make a better decision, or a more clear decision, I should say.
Based on money.
Thank you. Add in there. All right, so I know we had a couple more questions online too. Let's go ahead and go back to the online. We'll come back into the room as well. So I know I see your hand over there as well. Let's go online for the next questions.
Okay, so there's 2 questions online. The first being on number 6, on the number 6 plan drawing, Tanner, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this. I think there was a blue hydrocarbon layer in the ground column. What is that? Is this part of the contamination number 4 would remove? Do you know?
Put that slide back on.
Section.
So as we discussed, right, that was a cartoonish depiction. And certainly there have been times where there was Unocal that the system did remove. We're not seeing that we're not seeing that anymore. And so yeah, I guess you could take that as a historical picture. There's not Unocal that at least that we're able to observe at the site that would be being currently cleaned up.
Thanks, Tanner. There's one more online. In terms of your last response, the question about the percentage of contaminants that would be removed in option 4, you said that 95% of the contamination would be removed but can you clarify if that means 95% of the contaminants will be removed from the existing surface down to only 4 feet of depth? So they're asking about what that means in terms of depth.
So my 95% number, sorry, that's very much an estimate. That was covering the entire cleanup time period, so from 2001 to current. And so that a lot of those initial excavations went 10, 11 feet below grade. And so the excavations, particularly in 2007, 2008, which removed the most soil, those went fairly deep, and so well below the 4 foot depth. And yeah, I'm still not totally sure if I'm answering the question completely, but yeah, historical excavations went much deeper than 4 feet.
No, nothing else online so far. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, online audience, for patience as well into the room as we go back and forth.
Thank you. Tanner and maybe Chevron folks as well, I'm curious, some of the wording and vocabulary you folks have used tonight. The Chevron person who just spoke made it sound like they would take all the comments into consideration before making a final decision. And I guess my first question is, who's actually making the final decision? Is it Chevron? Is it Ecology? Or is it the two of you together working as a team?
So the feasibility study was prepared by Chevron and their consultants, but the cleanup action plan, which is the final plan for cleanup at the site, is the ecology document. So that will be, that one is. Again, Chevron will participate in the preparation of it. In fact, they've actually prepared a section of it already. Some of the background sections. Technically it's an ecology document, and so. We under the direction of MACA, we have the last say essentially, but it is we do have to follow the law as it's written.
So technically Ecology makes the decision, but it sounds like you're saying Chevron has a big voice in that final decision because they've provided all the data.
So yes, they provide all the data. They prepared the feasibility study, which is the document you're able to review right now, which gives the alternatives and scores it. We had input on the scoring and we just make adjustments there, and we can adjust that further based on public comments. All the steps getting up to the cleanup action plan were very heavily had Chevron's participation in, and but ultimately the cleanup action plan is an ecology document.
And then I guess my follow-up question then is, earlier in the evening, somebody mentioned something about, how do you make this choice and how do you ensure that Chevron does what the community wants it to do? And you said something about, well, we live in a capitalist society. But in reading your mission statement for the Department of Ecology, it says, we're proud to protect, preserve, and enhance Washington's environment for current and future generations. It doesn't say anything about within the limits of a capitalist society. So I'm just curious, are you being limited by Chevron, or are you following the mission statement of the Department of Ecology?
So the capitalist comment was completely centered around the sale price of the property that the next owner will be purchasing. But the cost is a part of MACA. So the disproportionate cost analysis is a written part of the law that we abide by, and cost is a large factor in that. And so that's something we very much encourage public comment, and general public sentiment is super important. And there's some if you don't like costs, unfortunately that's the law, that's going to stick. But if you don't like the way we us and Chevron did this DCA process, if we think we missed something in the we missed an alternative, or we think we scored it poorly, definitely comment on those things that you think we missed that can make a direct change to the feasibility study. Those are the most effective comments, because those are the things we can actually make a direct change to.
Thank you. And let me add a little bit more in for context. Working at all. Here's the other one. All right, you had the special touch. I worked for you when I handed it to you, not back this way. So in terms of the process, one of the infographics that we shared at the very beginning that went through different steps for the cleanup process, that's a formal process, and what defines that as formal is a legal agreement that Chevron enters into with Ecology. So these steps that Tanner was referring to that Chevron completed, it's because under the legal agreement, those are deliverables that they're required to complete. So the potentially liable person, or PLP, we shorten that with another acronym, they're required to be able to complete these different steps in the legal agreement. So Chevron is completing that work, but Ecology provides the oversight. So we're the regulatory agency to review and regulate those work. Drafts come in, drafts go back. There's a set of, a schedule of deliverables that dictates the back and forth and the timing. So to answer some of your questions, a little bit of the bigger picture of how we get to a draft feasibility study. Now, Tanner answered correctly as well. That draft feasibility study, we respond to the comments, consider those. We consider those, Ecology considers those. Chevron will also see them too. As we respond to those comments, Ecology will be responding to those comments. Now, practically we'll be doing that with Chevron too, and the consultants will have some input on the technical details to answer the questions that come in as well. So there is some tag team aspects for the expertise to be able to respond to those things. So that's Ecology's response summary back to the comments that we are asking you to submit to Ecology. And then, as Tanner had described, for that next step for the cleanup action plan, that is taken into consideration for what comments we receive, for what we actually do for the next document. That'll be out for review as well. All right, anything else online?
No.
Okay. Now, we'll see if this magically can work if I hand it over to Amplify if it didn't work for me. All right, so I think the next up was up front here.
It worked. Maybe it's magic.
Is it working?
Not this time.
The other one over here.
Kristen's.
I just want to be really clear.
No, this,
We're
we're getting it. Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to be really clear on this evaluation of alternatives here. That number 6 is preferred because it saves money for Chevron, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Somehow I think Chevron can afford to clean up more than somebody who's trying to restore the estuary.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Respond? Go for it.
Well, that may be true. We have to treat all liable parties the same. Not all liable parties have quite as deep as pockets. And so yeah, we follow the same process, no matter who the liable party is. It's written in the law to do the process in a certain way. And yeah, what we uphold is the cost is a part of the process. And I mean, there are some related implications to that. I mean, a lot of your high cost projects also are have a heavy greenhouse gas environmental carbon footprint. And so yeah, there are some other relations to just just dollars. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, most importantly, yeah, is that that's the way the law is written, and so, yeah, and regardless of who it is, we follow the same.
And I do believe I got it back working. 2 buttons, I figure I get one of them right.
Sorry, good.
So I have 2 questions. First one is simple, I think. Could you put that cartoon, so-called cartoon, back up there, please?
Go back to cartoons.
The print on it is so small that even I in the front row can hardly read it. And on the left-hand side, it says install a woven geotextile fabric. Where is that in that cartoon? I don't see geotextile fabric anywhere on the cartoon. Where is it? What does it do? Where does it go?
All right, so the cartoon. Here's the cartoon you need to look out for that. So all these red squares, which again we're going to resample these. The ideas are 20 years old, so that hopefully a lot of these squares will drop out. But any red square you see is an area of shallow soil contamination that is a potential exposure out to insects and wildlife. So those areas will have a geotextile fabric over it, much more substantial than you have in your garden.
You covering the ground surface is what you mean?
Yeah, so it'll be right on the surface with a aggregate cap over, so essentially a coarse gravel over the top of it. And the idea
So it's subsurface. It's subsurface.
I mean, it's below it, 6 inches of gravel.
Okay, so you expect a natural ecosystem to be growing on plants and everything to be functioning on top of that artificial thing?
So there'll be fairly limited areas, but no, we do not expect, in fact, in those areas, the preference actually, we would not like to have deep rooted plants going down into the contaminated soil, so that those would be areas that we would that restrict not only insects and animals, but also plant growth.
Look like a gravel parking lot.
Okay. Now, my second question is, to quote you exactly, I think, at one point you said, "We cleaned the creek up." What was unclean about the creek, and exactly what did you clean up and how did you do it?
So there was the sediment underlaying one side of the creek had some elevated, I don't actually remember off the top of my head the contaminants. My assumption is that they're all petroleum based, but there might have been some arsenic in there as well. But point being, fairly shallow sediments in the creek were contaminated, so they put a dam in the creek, rerouted the creek, and excavated out the top. I think it was just a foot, might have been 2 feet. I'd have to again check that. Of soil, and then put back in clean soil, and then took a dam on it, and the creek went back in its original spot.
Thank you.
I hear the term we were looking for, that's kind of it.
Go ahead. Up next, Jack.
When you respond to the question and comments that you received by the October deadline, do you send those out as they come in, or do you save them up to reveal in the final document?
I can help answer that if you want.
Oh,
Go for it,
ahead.
Kristen. Yep.
Yeah, so we will answer all of the questions and compile them into a final document and post them online so the public can read that, and we'll also email all the commenters to let them know it's available.
But you don't mail out any responses prior to the document being published?
No, so we start to compile answers to the questions potentially during the comment period or after, and it'll take some time because we see many comments coming in, so it will take a fair amount of time to answer all of those questions.
So we see no responses until the end?
Exactly, yeah, you won't see any responses until afterwards.
And part of some of that is, it takes us time to be able to compile all the comments at one time. But part of our response summary also will include some sort of a highlights of any of the changes from what you saw as a draft to what would be happening for next steps as well. So it's also a forward-looking document that lets you know kind of what the next steps are for this cleanup site. So it's an open door for the comments. We listen, we read them, we address them, and then we respond back to you all, everyone who has commented, and then you'll know what the next steps are at that point. So it's designed to be a back and forth so you know what's coming.
Can you comment more than once?
For the comment period, you can comment during the open comment period. After we send the response back, you can always reach out to Ecology. The next time to collect your comment would be to the next comment period for the cleanup action plan.
No, I mean, if you have a comment, but you want to bifurcate it because you have two different ideas, you don't want to confuse them, because sometimes people get confused.
Yes, so the answer to that is yes. So to summarize, the question was, can you submit multiple comments during the comment period? You want to make sure you keep the comments that you're asking topically separate? Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually a little bit easier for us to respond when you break them apart topically anyway. So that's helpful.
You can also read all the comments, just so you know.
And then we'll come back to that, okay?
So could you clarify, are you, Ecology, actually going to change Chevron's document? Or are you going to, Chevron changes what they want, and then when you write the cleanup plan, you're going to say, this is what we adopted from the feasibility study, so you could come up in your cleanup plan and say, we decided to increase the protection percentage to 50% rather than 30% as recommended by Chevron. Is that Is that a possibility, or whatever comes out of the draft or the final feasibility study is it?
Would you repeat the question?
So yeah, I try to summarize the question, and if I get it wrong, recirculate. So the question was, at the end of the comment period, what discretion does Ecology have to change and select for the cleanup action plan thereafter? What changes would happen to the revised draft that you all are available to review now? Did I summarize some of that?
Well, I read the document via Arcadis's document, Chevron's document, and they're providing it to you in accordance with their agreed order, right? So are you then changing their document, then using that in the final cleanup, or are you going to take the final cleanup plan and say, here's what we adopted and we decided, like I said, to change a percentage here or there, or change some assumptions that went into the analysis in formulating the final cleanup plan?
So in other words, take some of our comments to task rather than just stick to what you have up there.
Some of the scenarios will depend upon the comments that we receive as well and what aspects. As each document is progressed in the cleanup process, depending on if there is an adjustment, it might make sense to adjust something in the feasibility study or adopt it and advance it into the cleanup action plan. The feasibility study process and review process of that is to get us the next step further for the adoption of the cleanup action plan for the site. So it might just depend a little bit in terms of what aspects of the document make sense to refine in the finalization of the FS or the CAP itself for the next one. Because you could say, well, we're selecting this aspect and we're advancing it on, or we're adjusting this aspect and that's how it looks in the CAP. It's topical how to answer some of that, in the details. But in large part, one thing that I think we've covered, I just want to summarize it as well, additional sampling is a part of this. So once we have more refined data, that will also help dictate what is selected into the cleanup action plan or adjusted in the feasibility study and as it's finalized as well. So more data to come, more science to come. Tanner, do you want to add on? And I took a process approach to that. Is there any specifics on the site that you want to add in? Okay. Joe, did that help at all?
Well, I'm trying to understand, I guess, if we have 2 bites at the apple. So you finalize your feasibility study, which again, I'm calling Chevron's feasibility study, it's not yours. And then you're going to prepare a cleanup plan. Do we have a second bite at the apple relative to your, and are you going to explain in your cleanup plan why you selected that recommended alternative that's in the feasibility, in Chevron's feasibility study? Or are you just going to say this becomes our document and now it's cast in stone and you're into the next step?
Yeah. Some of that is a process aspect too. So
There will be a summary of the feasibility study in the cleanup action plan. So if there are significant changes that that need to be explained, then that will be explained in the cleanup action plan, like how we got from where we are now to what's in the cleanup action plan. And then as Ian expressed earlier, we will have another public comment period after the cleanup action plan, after the draft cleanup action plan is completed. So you'll have a chance to comment on that as well.
And the mic is also telling me a low battery, so we'll see how long this stands up.
I have a question. Wait.
Yeah, you had his hand before. Thank you, though.
The red squares that contain higher levels of contamination under the T's. Are any of those red squares in areas that have been excavated in the past and filled up with clean fill? And now we have contamination coming up out of that clean fill?
So again, these are, that's actually a really good question. And based on my response, maybe you can put together either a follow-up question or a comment.
I'll put it, I will do a comment.
Okay, so these are, so when, for example, when that orange, where'd you go? Oh, boy. Store, okay. So again, when this orange square was excavated, on the sidewall, the excavation samples were collected, and then it was backfilled. And so the data used to generate these was, most of these, you can see how small they are, it was one sample. One sample on the sidewall exceeded a cleanup level that was predictive of ecological receptors. And so, so yeah, these are all of these are based off of samples are collected when they got to the extent of the excavation. And then it was backfilled clean soil. And so yeah, so the assumption is that the soil that was put back in place that was clean when it was put there is still generally clean. And that these represent the edge of the excavation that didn't quite get all the contamination.
That, for example, didn't go deep enough or wide enough.
Yes, yeah.
So that, okay, that's the explanation. Did I?
Tanner, can I just jump in here?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
So what happened, or what the change was, is we redid the terrestrial ecological evaluation. So you've seen that term TEE before, right? And the TEE, the cleanup standards of the TEE are much more stringent than a general MODCA direct contact value. So these points are actually, because of the change in cleanup levels, before they were clean, and now, because of the change in cleanup levels, they are actually in exceedance of those cleanup levels. Does that make sense?
I understand that. And
it's not from contamination coming back up.
so
it's from
the contamination was already there, but under the prior standards, it registered as clean because
correct,
because of the T's were had lower standards of cleanliness, shall we say? Okay, I understand. Okay.
Okay. Cool. Yep.
I have another question, or paraphrase, and it's based on what he was talking about. You're going to take our comments, and if you want to change from a recommendation that's in the current feasibility study to a different recommendation, you would have to have evidence, some data to motivate that change, or a reason that you would put forth explaining why you're making that change. Is that correct?
Yeah, there have to be either some evidence or show us that we completely just missed something. Yeah, I mean, because it's not a vote, right? It's not, we didn't come here to be like, I want alternative 4 and that's what we're gonna get. So this is, I want alternative 4 because you missed this, it should be scored this way, you know, that's how we get to a different outcome.
Otherwise, if you were just said, you walked in and said, the community wants alternative 4, despite the scoring all along here, that would be arbitrary and capricious, more likely than not.
Yeah, because I mean, technically, Chevron followed the law in the way they did this. So unless we can show some way in which we did it wrong, yeah, this would be the selected option.
Why do you use the word we instead of they?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's their document, right?
They prepared it and they submitted to us. We provided comments. There's some back and forth, and then yeah. So there's definitely ecology input on this document.
But still their document.
And that's my question. I want to piggyback on what Joe had talked to you about before. Who decides what's going to get done? Department of Ecology? So Chevron submits what they think they want to do and how they think they're meeting the law, but then Department of Ecology comes up with the actual plan, the cap, whatever that was. Well, you regulate, to me, regulate is you check to make sure they're doing what has been agreed upon, but who decides? Who decides what's practicable? Who decides what is actually going to be done?
And so we make the decision based off of the DCA process. We have to follow this process.
Who's we? Department of Ecology?
Yeah, ultimately, we do have the final say on this was done correctly. This was a selected cleanup remedy.
I'm still not understanding who's selecting the cleanup. You're agreeing with Chevron, is what you're telling me. Am I understanding that right?
We're agreeing that they did the process correctly. And part of the reason why we have the public comment period is so the public has an opportunity to comment on the process, and if we miss something in our review, then he has an opportunity to say, hey, you missed this, you should put this in. Yeah, I mean, we agreed to it enough that it came to a, we presented it here to you, so we agreed that they did follow the steps laid out by the law, and it was fair scoring. So yeah, we'd have to have some reason to change. We can't just say we don't like what you selected because we want to do this. There has to be a reason that we want to adjust how they did the process.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Nothing on
I would just suggest that next time you do this chart, it's not set up as a pie chart where you have winners and losers, but rather individual elements that you evaluate. Yeah.
Thank you. To be honest.
So, following up on the previous question about who's really deciding, and I asked that question earlier also, so maybe a different way of trying to figure out what we're trying to collect or analyze is, can you give us an example of a previous time when Chevron submitted something in a similar process and the Department of Ecology said no and forced Chevron to do something different?
I cannot. This is the only Chevron project I can work on right now, and so and I wouldn't have, even looking at other sites, I wouldn't have an example off the top of my head of a significant change.
Yeah, this is James again, if I may. I've been working up in Washington for the last 5 years, which isn't very long compared to some of my peers, but it's not us, Chevron, saying, hey, Ecology, here's what we want to do. It's a team effort along the way, right? There's many meetings between us behind the scenes going into this document. So it wasn't us, preparing this document and then just shipping it to Ecology, saying, hey, can you bless this? It was talked about all along the way, many, many months, many years. Kim was before me as well. And as far as other examples, it's similar. We work with Ecology across the whole state. Many different types of sites. This one's obviously the most complicated. But it's always a team effort. And, from my perspective, I don't have any examples where Ecology has said, no, we don't agree with you. It's always been, like I said, talked about beforehand, agreed upon, put into the document, by both parties. So.
Thank you online as well for jumping in there. Follow-ups here from the room? For folks online that may not necessarily be able to see all of the room, we've got some hardy folks that have stayed here. Some folks have called it an earlier evening. I think you can see part of that. So online, if folks have other questions, feel free to add that in there. Let's see if there's other questions from the room.
Did you say earlier before the start that those that stayed late, you're gonna take us all out for ice cream?
Or you get an extra cookie, Dean. Take cookie home. But take it home, okay? You don't get to eat it here.
For those who stay late, if they get ice cream, that's like the end of the sporting event. So like the kids always look forward to the ice cream at the end, right? Maybe more than the event itself.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that maybe on that note we can call it the evening for folks. Thank you everybody for joining online. Thank you also for the folks that have stayed here online. Maybe you do have ice cream in your future here as well, one way or the other. But thank you for great questions, staying with the patients as we've been navigating two audiences as well. So I really appreciate that, everybody. And thank you folks online for your patience while we did the same here in the room too. So thank you for, well, I don't know if there's many folks that I could say thank you for the city of Edmonds, but for hosting for this event too. So really appreciate the venue and yeah. Well, thank you everybody. Have a great evening and comment period's open to the 24th.
And as your news reporter, I admire your fortitude staying here, asking the questions. I admire the folks from Ecology who came here to talk to us. And if you missed anything, you can read it in My Edmonds News probably by tomorrow night. I'll have a busy day tomorrow.
Thanks, thank you.
I'm turning this off now.